Hi, 6th graders. Today we are going to continue working on lesson 2.2. Okay, so our topic is still representing decimals, and our learning target is what we're going to really be focusing on today. Today we are going to be comparing and ordering decimals using a number line. So these are the same notes from the last video. You can just scroll down to the bottom page. So now we're going to compare and order. So let's start with compare. We are going to compare the decimals using the less than, greater than, or equals sign. Alright, so when I compare my decimals, I kind of do this one of two ways. You could start by writing them all out like this and comparing that way, or you can just be underlining as you go. So let's start. I have 2 4/10 and I have 2 7/10. So I look at my first number, 2. They're both the same. So I move on to my next number. I have 4/10 and I have 7/10. So I need to figure out which number is bigger there, 4 or 7. Right, it's 7. So 2 7/10 is bigger than 2 4/10. Alright, let's look at number 2. Now this time, I have 5 78/100 over on this side, and I have 5 83/100 on that side. So I look at my first number. My first number is a 5 in both of them. So that number really doesn't matter. So then we look at the second number. I have a 7 and I have an 8 in the 10th place. Well, those are different. So which number is bigger, a 7 or an 8? Right, this 8 is bigger. So 5 83/100 is bigger than 5 78/100. Alright, number 3. I'm going to change my colors. This time I have 821 thousandths over here, and then 813 thousandths over on that side. Alright, so I start with my first number, which is a 0 on both sides. So that doesn't really matter. Then I look at my next number. I have an 8/10 and I have an 8/10. Those are still the same, so I just keep going to my next number. My next number, I have a 2 in the 100th place and I have a 1 in the 100th place. Which number is bigger, a 2 or a 1? Right, the 2. So 821 thousandths is bigger than 813 thousandths. Alright, let's go to number 4. Alright, this one, I am going to start. I have 3 6/10 and I have 3 56/100. So I start with my first number. They are both 3s. So I move on to the next number. I have 6/10 and I have 5/10. Those are different, so I like to circle them when they're different. Which number is bigger, 6 or 5? Right, the 6 is bigger. So 3 6/10 is bigger than 3 56/100. Alright, number 5. Alright, I have 8 9/100 and 8 9/10. So I would also like you to be practicing saying these decimal names as we're going, instead of just saying 8.09, because that's not really how we name our decimals. So this one on this side is 8 9/100, and this on this side is 8 9/10. Okay, so we start with our first number. They're both 8s. So then we move on to our next number. I have a 0 in the 10th place and I have a 9 in the 10th place. What number is bigger, a 0 or a 9? Right, that 9 is bigger. So 8 9/10 is bigger than 8 9/100. Okay, let's look at our last one. I have 5 51 thousandths, and over here I have 5 11 hundredths. So again, I start with my first number. My first number is a 5. My next number, I have a 0 and I have a 1. They're both different, so I circle them. Which number is bigger, a 0 or a 1? Right, the 1 is. So 5 and 11 hundredths is bigger than 5 and 51 thousandths. Alright, so that is how we compare our decimals. If you have any questions, please let me know. But now we're going to work on ordering decimals. Ordering decimals can be a little tricky because we might need to add some zeros. So I will explain that as we get going. So I have 3 and 3 tenths, 3 and 1/10, 3 and 135 thousandths, and 3 and 13 hundredths. So I need to put these in order from least to greatest. So what I always do when I start is I write my decimals out just exactly how it is, and I line up my decimal places. So I have 3 and 3/10, and then I have 3 and 1/10, and then I have 3 and 135 thousandths, and then I have 3 and 13 hundredths. And then what I like to do is I like to make sure I have all my numbers filled in. So I add zeros so that all my numbers look the exact same. When you add zeros at the end of decimals, it really does not mean anything. It's just a good way to visualize which number is bigger and which number is smaller. Okay, so adding these zeros doesn't actually mean anything. My number here is still 3 and 3/10, even though I have 2 zeros in the thousandths place. Okay, it does not mean anything. So I need to put them in order from least to greatest. Alright, I'm going to change my colors here. So I look at my first number on all of them. They're all 3s, right? So that 3 doesn't really matter. So then I look at the next numbers. I have a 3 and then I have 1s. Which number is smaller, the 1s or the 3s? Right, the 1s are. So I'm going to put an X next to this one because I know that's not my smallest. Okay, now let's look at our next numbers. I have a 0, a 3, and a 3. Which number is smaller, a 0 or a 3? Right, this 0 is smaller. So my first number, my smallest number, is 3 and 1/10. And then I'm just going to cross it off so I know I'm done with it. Alright, now we're still looking at our numbers with the 1s in the tenths place. Now we need to figure out which number is smaller out of those ones. So I look at my next digit. I have a 5 in the thousandths place and I have a 0 in the thousandths place. Which number is smaller, a 0 or a 5? Right, this is 0. So my next number is 3 and 13 hundredths. Cross it off. Alright, and we're still looking at our 1s. So my next number would be 3 and 135 thousandths. And then I crossed it off. So the last number that I figured out was my biggest right away was 3 and 3/10. Alright? If you want to write all the zeros in your line of numbers, you can. You certainly don't have to because they don't really mean anything. Okay? Now let's look at our last problem. Ooh, this one I see a lot of zeros and 6s and some 7s. So it's very important that when we start, we are going to line our numbers up in order or in line with the decimal number. Okay, so we're going to practice reading these numbers first. This number right here is 6/10. This number right here is 6/100. This number right here, 67/100. And lastly, I have 607,000. Okay? If you have questions about how we read the numbers, please let me know. But I'm going to line all these numbers up by the decimal place. So 0 and 6/10. 0 and 6/100. 0 and 67 hundredths, and 0 and 607 thousandths. Alright, now I like to add my zeros so that all my numbers look the same. I'm just going to box this so my answer doesn't get all mixed up. Alright, so I look at my first number. I see they're all zeros, so it doesn't mean anything. So then I go to the next number. In my tenths place, I have a 6, a 0, a 6, and a 6. Which number is smaller, the 6 or the 0? Right, the 0 is. So that tells me this is my smallest number right here. So 0 and 6 hundredths. And then I can cross it off. I'm done with it. Alright, and then my next three are all the same. So that tells me I need to go to the next number. Alright, I have a 0, so I'm looking in the hundredths place now. I have a 0, a 7, and a 0. Which number is smaller, the zeros or the sevens? Right, the zeros are. So that tells me that this 7 is my biggest number. So I'm just going to cross it out right now so that we can focus on my next smallest number. Alright, now we look at our thousandths place. I have a 0 and I have a 7. Which number is smaller, the 0 or the 7? Right, the 0 is. So that tells me my next smallest number is 0 and 6 tenths. And I can cross it off. So then my next smallest number would be this bottom one where I had to go to my thousandths place. It was 0 and 607 thousandths. Alright, so that tells me my last number is the last one we haven't crossed out. 0 and 67 hundredths. And then I am done. Alright, so now your job is to complete 2 more IXLs, putting the numbers in order, and inequalities with decimals. That's comparing with the greater than, the less than, or the equal sign. And then you also have to work on 2.2 worksheet. If you have any questions, please be sure to let me know. Otherwise, have a great day, and I will talk to you